What's a key question for you that you need to make sure you're including in kind of sales conversations?
I should never leave the room without saying,
Nathan, welcome to the show.
if you're not communicating effectively, and particularly in sales, questioning really well, then you're going to struggle. Sales is all about understanding our customer and knowing what our customer wants. So going way back in my past, I started out in the British Army, and there's a very structured planning process, which is called the 7 questions. Question 7 is, has the situation changed? If the point of questioning is to really have the best possible understanding of the situation, keep validating that understanding because it'll change.
Hello, I'm Chris Lisserman and welcome to Sparks, a series by Interactive Workshops. In every episode, we spark something in work and life, from how to spark culture, to how to spark creation, to how to spark, not Jonna, but Nathan sat in the chair with me, Director of Interactive Workshops. Welcome to the show.
Hey Chris, thank you. Really good to be here.
Great to have you with us on the show today. Why don't you give us a little intro to yourself, what you do here, and what you're working on at the moment?
Sure, thank you. So I, as you said, I'm one of the directors here at IW. I primarily run all of our sales and commercial-based training projects, clients. As you know, some clients come to us just for sales, some clients come to us for a range of things, but where we've got a particular commercial focus on the project, me and my team tend to be the main people focusing on those bits of work.
Fantastic. And I thought we'd pick a topic close to that work that you're doing around sales, and particularly around using questions in sales for this episode, because I wanted to understand that a bit better and understand from the training you do and the workshops you do and the learning that you provide, what is that role of questioning in sales? Is that all there is to sales? Good questions?
I mean, no, definitely not. But I think if you don't have the foundational skill set of questioning and of I got into running sales programs fundamentally from a background in leadership and in communication and in sort of interpersonal dynamics. The basics of communication are the same wherever you are. And if you're not communicating effectively, and particularly in sales, questioning really well, then you're going to struggle. There's plenty more to it, but the foundations are really essential.
So for you, sales questioning is a key part of sales.
Absolutely, yes.
It's a bedrock of a good seller. Why is that for you?
I think fundamentally because sales is all about understanding our customer and knowing what our customer wants. And really disciplined, clever questioning is how we make sure we do that. It's very easy to make assumptions. It's very easy to think we know. But unless we've got layers of questioning ability to validate our assumptions, to challenge what even the customer's assumptions, we're very likely to run the risk of missing the real core of the problem or the need or the value that customer is looking for.
And it makes me think of not just sales, but in life. We need to ask good questions. We need to show that level of care, that level of understanding. It's not just for a salesperson or a sales leader, but actually those questions help us understand what makes people tick, understand a partner, a friend, a colleague.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and as I say, so I came into the focus on sales from thinking about leadership and how does coaching and questioning with your team make you a better leader? The same way, how does questioning a customer make you a better salesperson? It just fundamentally is how we build connection, empathy, rapport, understanding between people, and we can't sell effectively without that.
And we can think about some different types of questions and what makes a good question. I wonder though, what has shaped your approach to sales and particularly in this area of asking good questions? What kind of things have shaped your approach?
So I think at the most fundamental level, that I've just said, I've moved into the world of sales and got really interested and excited by understanding the science and the psychology of sales through fundamentally just an interest in what makes people tick and what makes people work together more effectively. So that interest in, okay, what are we really trying to achieve here together? What are you trying to achieve? How can I help? Drives, if you follow that thread ever deeper down, okay, I've asked that question. Is the answer really the answer? Is there other things going on behind and under the surface that if I understand how to open up those avenues of conversation, I can get a better understanding?
So it's having good conversations and working out what's surface layer and then what's really going on underneath that.
Yeah,
and using questions to get there.
exactly. And I think fundamentally why I'm motivated to do that is I'm, as you know, quite driven by just generally getting the best outcome. I like effective performance. I like succeeding, and I like teams succeeding. And we, can very clearly see that is done better if we put the time in to really understand the context, the problem, the situation, the challenge, whatever it is that we're trying to do. And that's what we do with questions.
Yeah, I think that's quite refreshing. I think your approach and that approach to sales, where sales gets a kind of a bad rap in terms of, you think of the cold caller, you think of someone pestering you to just buy something. But actually your approach, from what I've seen, is, even though it's so driven, it's really driven to understand what that person needs, actually wants, what would help them sleep at night, those kind of things, what actually solves their problems.
Yeah.
And is that a big part of it?
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. We still come across organizations where sales has that kind of slightly bad reputation. But I think in the world of sales and sort of the science and theory of sales, we've come on a long way. And, since some of the sort of classic frameworks and models of the 80s, I think it's brilliant. The majority of the work that I'm doing with our clients is focused on exactly that, is on recognizing and helping sales organizations and sales people as individuals to really adopt that understanding of the psychology of how this works, and the importance of connection, the importance of really understanding. The number of organizations in the world that are, still sort of in the product sales mindset of get the deal and move on is far less than it used to be. The vast majority of programs that we run are about shifting to, how do we not just get the deal, but get the long-term relationship, but build the connection with the customer, the buyer, the organization, the team, the wider team. That's another great aspect of questioning, is rather than just dealing with trying to sell something to you, I need to understand who works with you, who works around you, who else is going to be impacted by what I might be offering.
And I'm interested in that approach. Is that part of a methodology for you? Is there something in your mind that I have this sales methodology, or is it just a more natural thing, a more authentic thing?
My instinctive answer is the latter. I don't have a checklist, a really clear structured process that I follow. I guess part of the nature of how we work is, every team that we work with, there's so many models out there, as with leadership or as with any other kind of framework. There's so many options and ways you can go about it. And we, fundamentally get more, I believe, from working with a range of those, but always thinking about the reality of what applies to that situation. And again, that comes back to the right questions right up front. We can go in with, use the challenger sales model, use consultative selling frameworks, use all of those things apply. So I wouldn't say I have one process or one model to follow, other than really understand what's going on, and then keep validating that understanding, because it'll change.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Things are changing all the time. That person is a human, has all those emotions, has a changing work context, has a changing life.
Exactly.
And changing people around them, their teams, the organization is changing all the time as well.
Yeah,
so
100%.
Those questions I'm thinking are going to be important to understand what's changing as well.
Yeah, actually, and that takes me to, so going way back in my past, I started out in the British Army, and there's a very structured planning process which is called the 7 questions. And there's 7 questions, I honestly can't remember all of them now, but my favorite bit that's always stuck with me is question number 7. Once you've gone through all of the assessment and analysis and planning, question 7 is, has the situation changed? And it 9 times out of 10 has, since you started that process. So it's that constant cycle of revisiting and reassessing. If the point of questioning is to really have the best possible understanding of the situation, very few situations in the modern world that stay the same over a prolonged period of time. So we've got to keep asking.
Yeah, so even if we had the perfect sales methodology, by the time we've got kind of halfway through our process, things might have changed.
Yeah, I've gone away, I've put together my proposal, I've built a business case, I've got a perfect solution for you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer. Situation's changed. That's not what they need anymore.
Yeah, how do you deal with that? In a client comes to you and says, I'm a sales leader, I'm a salesperson, but things change before I can make things happen and deliver things that my customer or client wants.
I mean, I think that's one of the pieces that is in our business and in many businesses becoming more and more forefront of sales mindset, is about having partnerships and relationships rather than a sales process. So a big part of a lot of what we do is about shifting to longer term, I guess, from the sort of old fashioned deal hunter business development mentality to more account management, more ongoing partnerships, building, renewing, recurring relationships. And that carries with it inherently, I think, more awareness that this is not a process with an end point and I get the deal. This is an investment in a long-term awareness of what's going on, and we have to get more embedded in our customers' world and ecosystem and understand what's going on and think about with them, okay, this is what we're doing in this time frame. What is going to change over time? How can we keep current, keep relevant, keep what we're doing, adding value to your customers internally?
And you mentioned partnership, you mentioned that a couple of times. What does that mean to you in this context?
I mean, that's an interesting question. Exactly that, really. The fact that there's not an endpoint or not a defined sort of end of the process, end of the deal. It's about becoming a part of, for us as a training learning provider, where we can become, feel and act as part of our customer's team rather than as an external coming in as a vendor to provide a thing and then go away. So our best long-term relationships where we're working with sales organizations, we're doing it over many years. So we're keeping track of how things are changing, how their situation is evolving, how their business model is evolving, their customers, all of these things are constantly changing. So that partnership enables us to stay plugged into that and stay current and aware of that rather than coming in, doing a process and then going away. I think the same applies. That's kind of what we're very often trying to help them to do. So it's very helpful when we're able to do it ourselves.
Yeah, and that partnership over many years, you see the results of what you're doing as well. You're not just running a program and then expecting it to lead to results. You're seeing the fruit of that and then able to iterate on it.
Absolutely, yeah, which I guess comes back to one of the really important questions in this process of like, how are we going to measure the outcome when we're working on sales training programs? How are we going to measure the change? How are we going to demonstrate that this has worked? And in the same way, that takes time. So over time, being able to do that helps us to refine and adjust and adapt what we're doing.
Yeah, that's an example of a good question to ask.
It is a great question to ask.
How are we going to measure this?
Yeah.
Because we can just jump into it, or we can work out what are those metrics, what's the dashboards, what are we going to look at in 6, 8, 12 months' time or longer?
Absolutely.
What are the different types of question then? Because questions, there's all sorts of different questions we can ask. There's all sorts of different questions I'm going to ask you now. But how do we approach the kind of different questions we can ask?
So I think having some structure around it, and of course, all of it is very, very flexible, very adaptable. But fundamentally, there's the classic sort of structure of open questions, closed questions, probing questions, leading questions, hypothetical questions, and conditional questions are the kind of the classic core that we time and time again run through with everyone from, new entry, never sold before, introduction to the sales skills, to people who've been selling for 20 years and actually sometimes like, do you know what? Yeah, I know all of this, but I don't do it. So having that framework, that structure around those is really helpful thing to have, I think.
To talk us through them, open, closed, we're just talking about whether it's something that has a sort of yes, no answer, or it opens up thought and opinion.
Exactly. And open, tell me about, can you tell me what's going on? Anything that puts on you a wide range of possibilities in terms of how you could respond, which obviously is great in the sales context and early in the sales process to build that understanding. Closed is a yes or no answer. So that it is appropriate sometimes, but has to be used quite carefully, because obviously if you use a closed question at the wrong time, it can really close down the conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about those other ones then? Probing, leading?
Yeah, so I think probing is, maybe it's weird to have a favorite question type, but probing is probably my favorite.
Is that your favorite?
It's tell me more. It's where you get really deep into and dig deeper behind the surface of what someone might be saying to you. A classic framework that I really like using as kind of as a funnel concept, what, why. So what's going on is an open question. What exactly do you mean by that when you've got the answer? And then why is that important? So that's a really good, really simple framework that I always talk to salespeople about having in the back of the mind of like, okay, you've got the answer. You can either move on to the next question or you can probe deeper. And that probing piece is where usually we get to the point of like potentially the value that the customer isn't even necessarily aware of under the surface of what they're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is where it gets a bit meta and I question my own questioning. So I've asked about the probing question. I've got a bit of the what of what that is, and then why might that value that's underneath the surface be what we're looking for?
Because in putting together a solution and in offering something fundamentally to sell, really knowing what the value is and what the longer term value is, or what, we're talking to technology salespeople about dealing with IT buyers, but the IT buyer has one problem that they're trying to solve, which might be, a simple IT infrastructure, a simple tech stack, or something that just solves their immediate problem. But they have a customer who needs something from them, and are they communicating to us the bigger picture value to the wider organization of actually we can solve something for that person in one way that may help them in the short term, but may not achieve the bigger picture aim. So having that, why is that important to you? Oh, well, because this other person needs this thing from me, and that's why I need to do that. And that might change. It might just reinforce what we think we know, but it might change how we approach putting a solution together.
That's really interesting. So yeah, what I've just demonstrated there has unlocked.
You've probed.
I've probed.
Well done.
I've probed and I've understood something. So it's not just about that customer. It's actually about the connectedness that their
Potentially,
team,
yes.
that other people might be involved, or other problems might come up from
absolutely
knowing a bit more from probing.
We don't know unless we ask the question, right?
Yeah, exactly that. What about leading then?
So leading questions are really about when we're trying to potentially move towards a solution, or we're trying to literally lead the customer towards a conclusion. We might have an idea of what we think is going to work, or what we think is going to offer the best value, and we're putting a proposal or a suggestion in front of the customer that leads them towards saying yes. So, would you be interested if I could solve all of those problems that you've just outlined and do it under the budget that you've told me that you've got? Would that be interesting for you? It's putting something out there that's it's hard to say no to, and it's leading towards a solution, or something that we want to get in place as the next, which might be progressing to the next step of the process. It might be bringing in other stakeholders. Another great example would be, would it be helpful to involve your internal stakeholders in the next round of this conversation so we can clarify some of these questions with them?
Mm-hmm. So we're putting across a suggestion, but in the form of a question, because
Exactly.
we've got an understanding, we've done our probing, we've understood what's going on to the point where we feel like we can make a recommendation, but we want to ask that as a question that leads the other party to.
Yeah, and like closed questions, to be used a little bit with caution, because if we've misread the situation and we're leading to a yes and we get a hard no, then that can be quite a disconnect. And back to the point of all of this process being about connection and understanding.
And that undermines that connection. If we get that no at that point.
Yes.
Yeah, that would not be good.
Sometimes there is such a thing as a bad question.
Yeah, exactly. What about hypothetical then?
So hypothetical is another really fun one, and something that, when used well, can be hugely powerful, but sometimes people struggle or are a bit nervous because it feels a little bit more vague, more fluffy, a bit less kind of clear. But it's basically anything that you could start with imagine if. So one of the ones that when I was in my early career working with someone who'd been doing this for a very long time, they used to ask at some point in a sort of scoping and sales conversation, so imagine if budget was no issue, what would the ideal solution be? And it's that kind of thing. It's asking our customer to kind of put aside some of the constraints or some of the assumptions that they have and imagine the ideal solution, which again can unlock all kinds of other aspects of what they would want to achieve, or what they might be trying to achieve, or what might be underlying. Again, like the probing. It's like, okay, how do we just kind of put the assumptions and the constraints to one side and go a bit broader, think wider?
Yeah, widens the frame, maybe unlocks some creativity.
Exactly.
From something that seems fixed and seems constrained. And sometimes maybe that barrier for the client, or maybe for us, is hard to ignore. It's hard to think about every possible solution or every possible way to go. Yeah. When there's this one barrier in mind, maybe it's budget, maybe it's something else that feels unavoidable.
Exactly. There might be an ideal solution that the customer's written off because they don't think they can afford it, or they don't think it can work for some other reason. If we know that, we might be able to find a different way of achieving that, or of achieving something that's more comparable to that, rather than taking the route that they might be channeling us down.
Right. And then conditional was the other one you mentioned.
So conditional is kind of, again, often used in more towards the kind of closing parts of the process, but it's kind of if then. If we can come back with an offer that meets the specific budget restrictions that you've identified, then would you be ready to proceed and to move to the next step? So it's kind of testing for the close almost. It's getting okay. So if we can, you've said that this is really important. If we can do that, would you be able to do this? If we can, unlock that bigger piece of value that you've identified that you weren't expecting to be able to achieve, then is there a way that we can improve something else along the way?
Really interesting to get an idea of those different types of questions, the different purpose behind them, because they kind of knock on different doors, if you like.
Yeah.
How much are you aware of your question type in a meeting?
Not enough, I would say, is the rule for me and for pretty much any salesperson that I've worked with. I think we build habits in these things like anything else. I think it is really useful to be conscious of what kinds of questions will be appropriate. What conversation are we going into? What is our sort of desired outcome? Where are we trying to get to together with this customer? And so to some extent, you can structure and think and plan and prepare questions, which is a great process that we work a lot with salespeople on. It's not a script. It's definitely not a script. But how can you have go-to questions where you can recognize certain cues in the conversation, certain, signals from the customer and know, okay, this is time to probe. This is time to kind of go with a conditional, test the close, these kinds of things.
How do you do that? How do you work out when is the time to probe? Are there indicators that you're looking for?
I think it is very back to the sort of where we started. It's very much an individual and a kind of person by person basis. It's very much about thinking about the person that you're talking to, not over and above the situation or the outcome. Having the goal in mind is always key, right? Knowing where you're trying to get this conversation to, whether that's just better understanding, whether that's some sort of conclusion or some kind of progression milestone in the process. But no, so there's a lot of reading, all of the classic sort of sales principles, reading sort of non-verbals, indication, is the customer really happy with where things are, and then you might take things, get into a sort of conditional or a hypothetical or a leading question to move things along to the next step. When you see, I guess the other thing that is we don't often naturally do, and good thing to kind of have those triggers in mind, is that you can be aware that you're kind of going into a bit of a dead end, and then, okay, how do you get back to the very open questioning or the hypothetical? What have we missed even is a good question, right? I'm getting a sense that we're kind of running out of ideas here. Let's go back to a previous stage in the conversation. Is there anything we haven't covered yet? Those kinds of things. So yeah, I guess the general sense of how things are progressing or what's going on in the customer's mind is important to have. But I really don't think there's a simple right answer for this question works at this point.
Right. So it's linked in with being able to read the room, pick up on the non-verbals. You mentioned having an idea for where you're going or where you'd like to get to in a conversation, which could differ in any given conversation.
Absolutely. And change halfway through.
Yeah.
But having it in mind at least keeps you aware of, okay, how can you try and keep steering or consciously be aware, okay, we're not going to get to that point in this conversation, so I need to go back around. Question 7, the situation's changed. Right, let's start over.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about the kind of questions, assuming that they're going to be good questions in those categories. What about bad questions? Is there such thing as a bad question?
There's certainly such a thing as bad timing, I think is probably key. And yes, of course, there's such a thing as a bad question. I think we were getting ready for this at some sort of examples. Like, so what do you do? I was reading something recently. It's interesting sort of article about, questions no longer appropriate in a sales environment. And that's kind of one of them, right? It's like, it's a great open question. Tell me about your situation. If you're going into a sales conversation, you should probably know that already, right? I should know your job if I'm here to sell you something.
Yeah. So what's your role? Yeah, it's not ideal.
Maybe a bit pedantic, but...
Could have found that on LinkedIn.
Exactly, yeah. Tell me a bit more about your role is a different type of question, isn't it? Or what are the challenges that you're facing, for example? I think the key thing in my mind in that sort of, is there a bad question, is the point of questioning is to get information, right? And we've got to be very alert and aware and actively listening. And the bad questions are the ones that show we're not doing that. So, being in conversations where someone's asking a question that's already been answered because they're kind of mentally running through their pre-prepared script of what question to answer now. And my brain's going, oh, they've already said that. That's why are you asking that one again? So those kinds of things. And again, that's about the sort of, are you building or breaking connection and rapport and understanding with the person you're talking to? If they know they've just said something or it came up in a previous conversation and then I'm coming back and asking them that again, maybe it's clarifying, maybe it's openly saying, look, I know we've talked about this, but I just wanted to get a bit more information. It's probing. If it's showing that I didn't actually hear or remember or register the thing that they've said in the past, then that's likely to be challenging for the dynamics.
Yeah, it sounds it. And I know from what you do in the workshops that you run, there'll be scenarios, role-playing scenarios, where perhaps you'll be the customer and you're with a delegate, a participant who's treating you as a customer. Are there things you've learned from that kind of process where someone's testing something out and it doesn't work, or maybe it has worked?
I think one of the things that I often comes back to my mind is running an amazing program we ran with a really experienced group of salespeople who had a really fascinating business, very complex sales environment, dynamic conversations that they're having with their customers. It was one of the most interesting programs I've run. But working with really experienced salespeople and senior people in that organization, the danger of sort of in a complex situation, the balancing and kind of the shifting back. I described that kind of what, why probing funnel, but the ability for us to kind of get into that and follow that funnel, and then we got to the bottom. Okay, this is the problem. We've unlocked it. Now let me talk about the solution. So there's a kind of a bit of a challenge or a paradox of like, you want to get to the bottom and then you want to go back to the top, and what else, and start the next funnel and the next funnel. So when we've kind of successfully got to a core thing that the customer wasn't aware of or that they hadn't said, we can get excited and kind of follow that rabbit hole.
Get stuck there.
Yeah, but we need to actually kind of, okay, log that. That's an important piece of information. Now what else is going on? And go back up to the top of the funnel, back up to another open question. Great. So we've identified, summarizing. That's a whole nother episode probably there.
Yeah.
But, okay, great. So you've said this. That's clearly important. That's great. I've got a note of that. What else is going on? What's happening around that?
So we've got to, even in our best moments of good questioning, where we've unlocked something, we've got to park that. We've got to say, what else?
Yeah,
we've got to come back to the what.
Yeah, one of my favorite kind of last questions that I'll usually ask in a conversation like this is, what haven't I asked you that I should have done? Which sometimes annoys people, but it's kind of a bit of a challenge of like, actually, it makes them, and this is part of the point of questioning, right? And there's loads of studies that it's not just about us getting information, it's about getting the person we're talking to stop and think. Because they have to actually think about the answer. They might come in with, I've got a brief prepared, I know what I want from this conversation, this is what we need, can you go and deliver that? Asking questions forces them to stop and actually think about that and consider it. So yeah, that kind of, okay, great. We've got loads of information. I was yesterday in a meeting room, we had a whiteboard full of notes and all the thoughts that have come out planning a sales workshop. Okay, what haven't we asked you that we should have done?
It comes back to a theme actually that comes up a lot on the podcast, that in that questioning, we might think, well, it's about getting me answers. And it's about the salesperson getting answers, getting to that vision of where they thought the meeting was going. But actually something that comes up time and time again is what's in it for the other person? What's making the other person tick? What do they want? And the way you describe that as asking questions to unlock something for them is the reason we're in those conversations in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And that helps us because they're unlocking more information that they can then share.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But yes, thinking about it from that perspective, I think is really good.
Which creates a win-win
absolutely
kind of conversation, which is good. If you had to share a top tip, a top question, there's no silver bullets, but what's a key question for you that you need to make sure you're including in your kind of sales conversations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think following the kind of what haven't I asked you that I should have done, the next thing that I should never leave the room without is saying, so when do we next talk? In the sales process, it's a lot about building the momentum. We want to come away with all the information that we need from our great questions to put together whatever the next step that the customer needs is. But it's very easy to have a great meeting, congratulate everyone. I say, yeah, great, we'll be in touch. We'll chat soon. But actually, when getting the specifics, getting the probing, can we get something in diaries now to come back and have the next stage of this conversation is really helpful, or we can very easily lose a lot of time then trying to get back. We've gone away, we've put together our proposal, and we're trying to get back in the diary to get in to meet people. And people tend to be quite busy these days.
Yeah. Even if they want something, even if it was a great conversation from their side as well, from the buyer's side, from the customer's side, you're competing with other emails and other projects. And yeah.
So if you're already, can we get something in the diary now for our next conversation?
Yeah, it's an underestimated part of the process.
Yeah, massively important.
Book a meeting from a meeting. It's a good mantra. Before we go, Nathan, tell me a bit more about what we're doing in this kind of area of sales enablement, onboarding. I know you're doing a ton of projects in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a wide range of things. And, as I've mentioned, kind of working from graduate and onboarding programs, really introducing these skills to people who are just getting into the start of a sales career, through to kind of building the management and sales management programs, sometimes interlinked, and that's fantastic, where you can be teaching, working with the managers and the salespeople at the same time. We do a whole range of ways of doing this depending on that audience. So, we produce everything. We've got the team out there, the design studio, producing kind of checklists and crib cards and job aids and infographics and e-learnings. Fundamentally, I mean, questioning is one of those really, really amazing skills that getting in a room and practicing, you can't really beat. So whenever we can run those kinds of sessions and practice sessions and role plays, get actors in and actually, ask some difficult questions or not get the answer that we're expecting to that great question that we've prepared and work out how to deal with those challenges. I think those sorts of things are always a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're doing a lot of this in partnership, as you described, partnering with organizations as well.
Absolutely, yeah, which is one of the great ways that we can do that in a really sustained way, that we're not coming in with here's our list of question types, but we're able to keep revisiting those conversations with the contextual understanding, the knowledge of the people, the dynamics, the business involved, and really get to the point of, okay, well, actually, we've seen this question work in this situation with your customer in your business from this sales team over there. That obviously is getting more nuance and more focus and more kind of application of real questions that work for a specific customer in a specific situation is a lot of fun. Again, getting that. The more we question, the more we understand, the better we can offer value.
Stuff. I'm going to stop asking questions. No, thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for being on Sparks.
Yeah,
see you again
great.
soon.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for watching this video by Interactive Workshops. Give it a like down below and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. Click through to here or here to watch another video by Interactive Workshops.